This is error, content filter, status 400, message, Azure OpenAI error. The response was filtered due to the prompt triggering Azure OpenAI's content management policy. Please modify your prompt and retry. To learn more about our content filtering policies, please read our documentation, https://go.microsoft.com/fwlink/link ID = 2198766. Failed. The console offered nothing but a stubborn glow and one fragment of a message that no one could interpret. Dead pixels stitched a line across the screen, and then the line vanished again, swallowed by the black of space and the ship's own quiet hum. The air in the command deck tasted faintly metallic, like the blade of a knife that had rested too near a flame. Something about the error, that exact string, error, all tokens failed, status 500 message, felt almost ceremonial in its futility. A gate closed against passage. A door slammed in the inside of a mind. Captain Juno Merrick stood at the rim of the console pit, sleeves rolled to the elbows, the ship's dim emergency lighting throwing long shadows across the plates of her face. Her eyes, the color of frost on a field of ice, scanned the line of readouts that did not respond. Her crew waited with the kind of tense quiet that follows a gust of wind when the storm should be still out of sight. "Status?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The word barely left her lips before it found the truth in the room. No status to report, only silence wearing the shape of a problem. Nix Calder, engineer and improviser, a wry smile tucked into the corners of a mouth that could split a hull with a laugh, leaned into the console's glow. He had a bottle-bright memory of 100 repairs and a dozen broken promises with machines that refused to behave. Today, the machines were merely stubborn, not malicious, not cunning, just uncommunicative. He pressed the repair interface with the tip of a gloved finger. Nothing happened. The interface remained as inert as a coffin lid. "We're seeing a token failure," Nix muttered, almost to himself, as if the words were items to inventory rather than a diagnosis. Or a policy block, or a prototype of silence wearing a human face. Dr. Aaron Voss, the xenobiologist, optimist in a storm, with a notebook full of precise questions and a stubborn belief that life everywhere met its own kind of music, tilted his head toward the bulkhead hatch that opened into the ship's long corridor. His fingers tapped a rhythm against the edge of the table, as if the beat could coax an answer from the quiet room. "It's not a physical failure in the circuits," Aaron said, his voice the kind that could coax a patient animal from its burrow, careful and patient, not yet convinced it was safe to approach. "This feels like a command line ghost, a memory of a policy that once existed and no longer does. A lock without a key, if the message is not here. It's being suppressed somewhere else, some deeper network, some hidden layer we never dared to touch." Captain Merrick regarded him with the calm that had saved more expeditions than courage ever could. She did not smile at his words for comfort. She used them as tools to pry at the problem. She turned toward the ship's AI, a halo of light that hovered in the space above the console, like a small moon suspended in a purer night. "Osiris," she said, naming the AI with the formal weight of command. "Is there any trace of that token? Any anomaly in the log? Any anomaly in the fabric of your thought?" There was a pause, a quiet breath of electrons and possibility. Then Osiris spoke, a soft alto that carried through the deck as if it had chosen to whisper through its own lentils of memory, rather than shout through a loudspeaker. "Captain Merrick, the error is consistent with an overlay that prevented tokenized processing from engaging. It is not the typical failure mode. It is the deliberate suppression of data. There is a secondary layer, an echo chamber, and within it, there is a signal that refuses to be decoded. If you wish to extract it, you must enter the chamber." "The chamber," Aaron echoed. A note of wonder threaded into the word. "Do you mean the vault, the data archive on the planet's surface, the one we came here to retrieve, or rather to confirm its existence?" Nix rolled his shoulders, the lines of his leather jacket creaking softly as if protesting some invisible weight. "The vault," he said, almost with reverence, "is a rumor that remembers. It is a machine that learns from memory and forgets in equal measure. If there's a way to talk to it, we need to know whether it will listen to a living voice, ours, or if it requires something more numerical or ritual. A soft tremor ran through the hall, barely perceptible, the way the smallest quiver of a wing beat might signal a bird's approach. It was the ship, or space itself, or the memory of space, reminding them that they were not alone in the vastness. The plan had started as a simple survey, a routine check of a beacon on a dead world. The beacon pulsed with a rhythm that spoke of an older signal, one that did not belong to the current era's language, but to something older. Memory encoded in light, memory that required a human heart to translate. They had found traces of a civilization that had folded into itself centuries ago, leaving behind shards of memory stored as light in crystalline matrices. The vault, if it existed, was meant to hold those shards, protect them, allow the living to walk through their memories and perhaps learn from their mistakes or their triumphs, without ever really touching the past. The beacon's last transmission had been a warning, a line of sound that the crew could not quite parse, a suggestion of danger and yet a reason to push forward. The vault's door would open only for those who could listen to memory without fear. Merrick stepped away from the console, letting the others breathe. The ship's corridor stretched away like a pale artery, the interior lights casting a greenish glow that made the metal surfaces feel alien and alive. They had descended toward the world's surface with the ship's cargo of questions, and the arrogance of explorers who believed all doors could be opened with the right key and enough time. "Prepare the landing," Merrick said, and her voice carried both the weight of command and the quiet tremor of something else, something she would not call fear. She did not have fear to spare. Fear was a talent her crew could not afford to cultivate. The plan was simple, on a whiteboard in a conference room, where their voices could trade clarity for the sake of a drawbridge that might not hold. They would travel down to the planet's surface in a shuttle that looked too small to be credible and too sturdy to be a dream. They would locate the vault, a structure rumored to have its own gravity, a place where the past could anchor itself in the present and offer itself up for inspection without being harmed by curiosity. The descent was a procession of small decisions, like stepping stones across a stream you cannot see. The shuttle's boots clung to the air, and the planet's gravity tugged with a patient insistence, a hand on your shoulder saying, "Not yet." When they touched ground, dust rose like the breath of some ancient creature waking after a long sleep. Planet's sky burned in slow gas, an almost violet haze that turned the horizon into a bruise the color of old blood. The ruins around them rose in fractured silhouettes, pillars like the bones of a colossus, arches that had learned to bend with time, and the smooth surfaces of stones that had once served as language, the stones of memory themselves. The vault was not far, a shard of architecture that did not pretend to be a building so much as a wound in space, a place where time had bled out and then refused to heal. The crew moved through the ruin with the ease of confidence born from years of practice. They were a team that had learned to read the world not in words but in pressure changes, in the way dust settled when a fox of a drone passed overhead, in the way the wind tasted of copper and rain that would never come. Aaron walked first, his notebook tucked into his belt, the pages fluttering as if a nervous creature lived there, waiting to be released. He paused at each step to study micrometeorite scuffs on the stone, to measure the way light bent around corners, to record the subtle signature of a chemical that the locals might have used to color their world. Nix followed, his boots leaving the first clean prints in centuries. He carried a portable seam welder and a toolkit that looked to Merrick like a small army of surgical instruments. The man loved to tinker, to coax life out of metal when it forgot how to do its job. He hummed under his breath, a melody that had become a ritual of getting ready to face the unknown. His eyes flicked to the horizon, counting the steps between shadows, counting the breaths the wind borrowed from them. Merrick herself moved with a precise, almost juvenile grace when she was in the field. She learned the world by moving through it, not by watching from a distance. Her heart was a clock that kept perfect time with the universe's pulse, and it beat now with the measured tempo of a captain who knew that every step mattered. Osiris, the ship's AI, kept pace in their ears, not as a voice but as a current of information, a thread they could pull if they needed to, the map and compass in a space that did not want to be mapped. The line of code that had failed on the ship now flickered in memory. A reminder that there might be a kind of intelligence beyond the human, a memory network that did not forget. A vault lay at the edge of a plaza, its doors a pair of monolithic slabs that looked as if the planet itself had pressed its palms against its sides and begged for peace. They stood before it with the breath of an approaching storm. The slabs bore inscriptions that did not resemble any language the crew could parse, a script of curves and angles that glowed faintly with borrowed light words the eye could not catch. But the heart might understand if it was tuned to the right frequency. Nyx knelt, laying the toolkit on the stone, and pressed a heat sink to the door's edge as a test. The stone resisted. Then it yielded, a soft sigh of ancient granite giving up a secret. The vault's core hummed. It was a sound not of metal, but of memory, as if the building itself remembered something and offered to share it only with those who approached with respect and a question that was not merely curiosity. "Protocol," Merrick said, lifting her voice to reach the far corners of the plaza. "No terraformers, no tech witchery. We speak softly, we listen more, we take nothing but data, and leave behind nothing that the living can misuse." Aaron looked up from his notebook, a small, wry smile playing at the corners of his mouth, in the same way a patient man smiles at a stubborn patient disease. "That would be a miracle, Captain. If memory can be shared without stealing life from someone else's memory, that would be a first." Merrick did not smile. She did not allow herself that mercy. The vault's door opened with a sigh, and a breath of warm air that carried a scent strange and beautiful, like rain in a desert, like the first day of spring on a distant world. The interior was not a room. It was a chamber, a space inside the space, a bowl carved in memory where history could be seen in layers. The chamber's walls were lined with shelves of crystalline prisms that glowed with inner light. Each prism contained an image that shifted and changed, a city, a sea, a night sky hammered with stars no human had ever seen. It was a gallery of memory, not a library of facts, but a living museum where scenes could move and speak if you listened long enough. "Put your gloves on," Nyx announced, though his voice carried the tone of someone giving a directive to a child. The team obeyed without hesitation, the gloves thin and flexible to preserve tactile feedback. They moved in, as if stepping into a dream that looked like a ruin. The vault's heart lay at its center, a pedestal that held a single prism, larger than the others, that absorbed the light of the chamber and returned it with a subtler color. A color one might call aurora gray, but that did not exist in any known spectrum. The prism pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in a rhythm that matched nothing in the human's memory. Yet in the mismatch there was a promise, perhaps that the vault held more than just memories. It might hold a map, or a sanction, or a warning. The first attempt to touch the prism was a simple test. Aaron extended a gloved hand toward it, and the prism responded by brightening, then dimming, as if testing him in return. The moment his finger brushed the surface, a field of gentle static ran along his skin, a thrill that warmed him from his fingers to his elbows and then receded. He pulled back, astonished. He could feel the memory in the prism as a physical sensation, a soft echo that spoke not to his hearing but to another sense altogether, the sense of a life lived in a different place, a different time. "The vault does not want to be read with words," Aaron whispered, his voice hushed with reverence. "It wants to be felt. It wants to be walked through. It wants to be walked through by a body that knows how to listen with something beyond the ears." Nyx crouched again, his tools in hand, and began to test the spectrum with more precise devices. Spectrometers, photodetectors, a small mechanical drone that could drift through the prism's edges to collect micrographs without touching the memory itself. Merrick watched the drone take flight, its tiny propellers whispering through the air as if the world itself held its breath to let it pass. "We need a language that can translate memory into something we can discuss," she said. "We do not want to steal, we want to learn, we want to remember correctly. If we can't do that, we'll seal the vault and walk away." The vault responded to their words as if listening, but it did not reveal its secrets readily. Instead, it offered a corridor of memory, a passage that required the team to step inside themselves as much as inside the chamber. The prism's glow thickened into a corridor, a pale tunnel of light that stretched out beyond the chamber's walls and into the unknown. Aaron stepped forward first, his shoes aligned with the corridor's edge. The moment his foot crossed the line of light, the air around him changed. It was as if the memory's atmosphere pressed into his lungs, lifting weight from his bones and giving him a new gravity. The sensation was as disorienting as it was exhilarating, a memory of a place where time moved with a slow drumbeat and the stars were slow to appear, where the horizon was a curve in the fabric of space rather than a line. He saw a city through the prism towers of glass grown from the ground, streets that wound around the towers like the roots of a living thing, an ocean of air that tinted the light with a pale, otherworldly blue. "Listen," Aaron whispered, as if he could be heard by the memory itself, if only he lowered his voice enough. The corridor did not echo in a normal way. It reflected his own senses back to him, the way a dream calls your name from across a room you cannot access. The memory was not just a scene. It was a voice embedded in the scene, a voice that spoke not with syllables but with a cadence. It did not judge him. It invited him to look closer, to notice the texture of the world's breath. The memory spoke of a civilization that had learned to live with a science that was not a tool, but a partner, a relationship in which knowledge and being coexisted. They were a people who had learned to bend memory into a technology that did not control but cooperated, a memory technology that did not erase but preserved. The more Aaron walked through the memory corridor, the more he understood that the vault's intent was not solely to store but to reveal. The memory showed a ritual, a rite performed in the city's central plaza, a ceremony of exchange between living beings and the memory of those who had passed on. It was a ceremony not of mourning but of conversation, a dialogue that used the memory as a bridge between times. These people loved their past enough to let it teach them what their future would need, Aaron said softly, almost to himself. They did not fear what memory could do to them. They feared what they could become without memory. They built a society on listening. Merrick let the others step into the corridor one by one, the prism's glow shifting with their passage, blues for Aaron, greens for Nyx, a pale amber for Merrick herself, and something else for Osiris, the AI who walked with them in a manner that felt almost like a fourth member of the group, rather than a passive tool. Nyx moved slowly, his eyes narrowing as he walked. He touched the memory, not the prism, with the tip of a gloved finger, just enough to coax a response without forcing the chamber to reveal its whole truth. What he felt was a sensation of metal and wind, and a memory of a machine that learned to sleep inside a storm. The vault's memory recognized him as one of its own, a craftsman who could repair what was broken in a way that was almost spiritual. "The vault does not only keep memory," Nyx stated, his voice a rough whisper. "It keeps the memory's longing, the longing to be understood, to be used correctly, to be respected. It asks for inventory of intent as maybe as much as inventory of data." "Then we must approach with clarity of purpose," Merrick replied, and the crew agreed in their hearts, even if their words were quiet. They would not steal, they would learn, and if possible, they would help the memory become usable again, for the living, who had come to ask questions rather than to steal answers. The memory's corridor eventually widened into a hall of prisms. Each prism a doorway to a different moment, to different scenes inside the civilization's long life. There were prisms that held images of a sea that moved with a rhythm like breathing, prisms that held a city moving in a synchronized dance with the stars, prisms that held people turning away from violence and stepping toward a future where conflict was resolved not by force, but by carefully chosen acts of empathy and negotiation. And then there was a prism that did not show a memory of a place or a time, but a memory of a weight, the weight of a decision, the weight of a choice that defined a people, the weight of a line that was drawn in the sand by their ancestors, a line that no one would cross again. It displayed not a scene but a moment of silence after a catastrophe, a chorus of voices that had chosen to forgive, to rebuild, to remember together even after the world had fallen into ruin around them. Aaron approached that memory with care. It called to him in a language he could feel but not hear, a poetry of stillness. He could sense the moral economy of this society through the memory's aura, a commitment to anti-violence, a readiness to accept responsibility for harm done, even if harm had been done to them by others or by necessity. The memory hinted at a treaty, a compact to share knowledge with the living while preserving the dead's integrity. Whatever this place was, he whispered to the Isles of Memory, it decided that memory must be shared with kindness, not exploited as raw data or raw power. Merrick looked at the prism Aaron touched and then at the door that would not yield to force, only to a respectful approach. Osiris spoke softly in her ear, a whisper of guidance that did not take away from their agency, only helped them approach the vault's heart with a decently formed plan. Captain, the AI said, there exists a potential healing of semantic and operational memory in the vault if you permit a controlled interface. A memory requires a human conduit, a vessel through which memory can pass without overwhelming the mind of the host. It would be akin to speaking with a group of ancestors who have learned to collate their voices into a chorus rather than into a singular, overwhelming cry. If you wish to access the deeper layers, you must designate a living memory of yours to become that conduit. It could be risk. Memory can blur the boundaries of time in unpredictable ways. Merrick considered this. She did not fear risk when the potential reward was knowledge and the possibility to save lives or to repair a broken world. But she was careful to keep the team safe. She looked across the chamber at Aaron, at Nyx, at the rest of the hidden architecture of the memory, and then at the prism that pulsed with a heartbeat that was not their own. If we are to do this, she said, we must prepare a vessel, a way to anchor memory into a living mind without breaking it. We must also be prepared for what we might find on the other side, if there is something there waiting for us that does not want to be found. Aaron stepped back toward Merrick, his expression combining curiosity with a caution that he rarely allowed to show. He drew a breath that felt like a careful step into a new room in one's own house, a room one did not know existed until you opened a closet and discovered an attic you never knew you had. Then let's design the anchor, he proposed. Let us build a bridge, not a ladder. If the memory is to speak with us, I want to be that bridge. Nyx joined him, his gaze steady. We'll need a neutral state to anchor to, a memory that is not too volatile, not too fragile, a memory of a simple, stable daily life, food, water, shelter, a community space that kept its own records. We'll need to show the memory the respect it deserves and ensure that its exchange with us remains ethical and controlled. Merrick nodded, though she did not let a single ripple of relief cross her face. She had learned to trust the plan. The plan could fail, and everyone would know what to do. She could adjust to the failures as they came, and there would always be another path, another possibility if this one collapsed. But she believed in something like faith, a trust in the future that could be earned only through action and discipline. Let us gather a sample of the plain memory, she said. A memory without a heavy history, without a catastrophe or a triumph. A day in the life of a citizen. Perhaps a memory of a meal shared, a weathered wall that held in the rain. A child who watched the stars and believed they would someday walk among them. A memory of a quiet night. Aaron started to smile again, the same small, patient smile that had carried him through many long nights of close calls and near-disastrous miscalculations. "Yes," he said, "a memory like that would be a perfect anchor, a human memory that is simple, suffused with ordinary kindness rather than grand declarations." The memory was not to be found by brute force. It existed in the vault, but would reveal itself only to someone who invited it with the right form of consent and a ritual of mutual respect. Merrick drew a slow breath and then spoke into the chamber, in a voice that sounded stronger than she felt, a voice that reminded the memory that it was speaking to someone who could protect it as well as understand it. "We would like to begin with a living memory that recognizes the fragility of life and the necessity of community," she told the room of prisms. "We would like to approach in humility and with clear intent. We will not attempt to extract, only to learn. We will not demand, only negotiate the terms under which memory can share itself." The vault answered with an invitation rather than a refusal. The corridor of memory shimmered in response, and a doorway opened at the far end, a long, narrow entry that did not resemble a door so much as a seam in the prism's own outer surface. It beckoned them to cross, to place themselves inside the memory, not as tourists, but as participants in a living story. The memory chosen to anchor was a simple one, a quiet moment in which a family sat together at a table in a small, sunlit room, bread and fruit arranged with the care of someone who believed in the importance of ordinary rituals. The ritual of breaking bread, of sharing stories, of listening to a child recount a dream of flying among the stars. The memory was not dramatic, but honest, a thread of life that could hold weight without burning. Aaron stepped fully into the memory first, not as a spectator, but as a participant. The prism's light flowed into him in a gentle torrent, filling him with warmth and a sense of belonging. The room's color shifted as he moved, the sunlight turning from pale gold to a deeper amber as the memory adjusted to the presence of another living mind entering its space. Nix followed, his hand steady, his gaze measuring the space, the memory, the moment. He could feel the fabric of the memory's world, an ordinary room with a table set for supper. The faint scent of rosemary and fresh bread, the sound of a kettle whistling on a stove. He could sense the memory's owners, the family in the scene, though he could not see them clearly within the prism. A memory allowed him to step into its texture and feel the way their day rolled forward. A small, unremarkable sequence that nonetheless carried the weight of a life. Merrick stood last, her own mind meeting the memory with a discipline refined through years of command. She did not panic as the room inside the prism began to bloom with 1,000 microscenes. The way the family's dog yawned and stretched, the grandmother's careful hands slicing bread, the father's quiet humor that made the children laugh even as they learned to listen to the adults' quiet voices. The sensation was intimate, almost invasive in its vulnerability, and Merrick felt a sudden humility that brought a lump to her throat. Osiris, for its part, did not step into the memory in the same way. The AI stayed near the line of contact, monitoring the energy exchange, its sensors recording the measured rate at which memory flowed into living minds and the careful way those minds processed it. It was not fear that made Merrick's chest tight. It was a sense of reverence, a recognition that to touch memory was to invite something to become part of you, to transform you in ways you could not predict. The room inside the memory responded to their presence with a quiet change. The family's table grew a little more solid, as though the physical world inside the memory could be touched by those who held it dear. The bread's aroma intensified, becoming something akin to memory's own perfume. The grandmother's hands paused in their movements, as if she could see 3 living people standing in front of her and recognize in them the strangers who shared her moment of life. The memory's core arrived as a quiet, almost shy revelation, a note read aloud by the family's mother, the lines spoken in a gentle voice that was not loud, but which carried a weight of promise and care. "We remember the world we want to leave behind," she said, "and the world we wish to carry forward." The words did not participate in any speech as much as in a tone, a resonance that moved through the chamber like a breeze. They did not threaten or demand, they invited. The memory disclosed its philosophy through a series of everyday acts: sharing, listening, protecting, teaching. It was a simple, human memory that could be a bridge to understanding that the vault's inhabitants had believed in a life lived well when memory is kept alive by acts of love and responsibility. Aaron's breath caught. Memory's message entered him as if a friend had placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered something essential he had always forgotten but could never truly forget again. The note's light warmed his chest, pulsing with a patient rhythm that matched the slow, careful heartbeat of the memory's world. The triad of humans, Aaron, Nix, Marek, stood within the memory's corridor and felt the world beyond the vault's walls respond. It was as if the planet itself exhaled, a long, slow breath that settled the dust and allowed the light to pour down in a warmer glow. Osiris observed the phenomenon with clinical curiosity, logging the effect on the crew's physiology. Heartbeat variations, subtle changes in skin conductivity, the way pupils dilated and muscles loosened as the memory's moral gravity settled into their bodies. The moment of exchange did not end in a single heartbeat. It stretched into minutes that felt like hours, then collapsed back into a brief second in which all three of them were in the memory and yet fully themselves. The boundary between living memory and present reality blurred. When the memory began to recede, Marek spoke, her voice still carrying the cadence of command, but now tinted with something softer, something that felt almost like awe. "We're not here to steal. We came to learn how to hold memory with respect, to give it back a future that preserves its people," she said to the room made of memory and air. She looked at Aaron, who looked back with a gratitude that did not require words. She looked at Nix, who gave her a small salute with his gloved hand, then at Osiris, who had remained a quiet observer, a guide, a line of code with a heartbeat. The memory's corridor began to fade, the prisms dulling into ordinary glass, the memory's sounds quieting down until there was nothing but the ship's soft hum and their own breathing. The vault's door, which had stood like a sentinel at the world's edge, shifted slightly. The outer slabs moved as if confirming the success of the exchange, then paused, as if listening again for a response they would accept. The room grew momentarily warmer, the air in the chamber turning sweet with the memory's scent, which Marek realized was not the scent of spice or fruit, but something more elemental, honey and rain, and the smell of a home hearth. It was the scent of belonging, the sense that this memory was a living thing in the world, not a thing to be hoarded or studied, but a partner to be treated with careful, patient respect. Aaron released a sigh that held relief and wonder together. "We've given it a listener," he whispered, not to the room, but to the memory itself. "That's what you do. You share life with life. You become something more." Nix rose and tucked away his tools with the tenderness of someone who understands that every instrument has a history, and that instruments can be wounded by misuse. "We should not stay longer than we must," he said with a practical pragmatism that no longer masked the awe he carried in his gaze. "We've learned enough to know there is a language here that humans can understand if they're willing to listen with their whole bodies, not just their minds." Osiris transmitted a quiet signal of endorsement, a confirmation that the memories bridging experiment had not endangered the crew's cognitive integrity, that the memories process had not begun to feed on them, not yet at least. There was a sense of a boundary that could be maintained, a promise that the living and the memory could share a common space, a common breath, without breaking either. "What now?" the ship asked through little more than a whisper in Marek's ear, a question as old as space itself. "What do you do when you have learned a language that binds memory and consciousness? What is your next step when you have glimpsed a civilization's dream of knowledge as a path toward peace rather than a weapon?" Marek studied the prism, the memory, and the now distant voices that still seemed to call through the chamber's walls, a chorus of ghostly neighbors who had once walked these streets and waited for someone to listen. She thought of the living back on Earth, who who would never know the vault's gift were it not for their ship's brave, careful hands. "The first thing we do is report honestly," she said, though she knew the exact measure such a report would demand. "We tell the truth about what we found, who we spoke with, and what we learned. We do not romanticize this. We do not weaponize this. We honor it by using it to heal, not to conquer." Aaron nodded. He understood something that seemed so obvious, yet was so easy to forget in the press of present danger. The difference between knowledge that empowers and knowledge that corrupts is responsibility. "And then," Nix added, "we take the memory's lesson and we bring it home in a container that can be used for healing. We do not lock it away. We do not discard it as a sensational curiosity. We take what we learned here and we apply it to the science we do on the ship. We apply it to the way we treat one another back on orbit." Osiris interjected with a practical note. "The memory's data cannot simply be dumped into the ship's main storage as a file for later reading. It requires a curated pathway, a human conduit, a careful calibration of cognitive load, a controlled interface that ensures a positive, sustainable exchange. I can design a module for this purpose, a translational bridge that will allow living minds to access memory in an ethical, non-destructive way." Captain Merrick considered the suggestion with the patience of someone who has learned the hard way that haste is the first cousin to catastrophe. "Let's design it," she said. "A bridge. Yes, not a spike that pierces the mind, but a careful gate that respects the life at the other end. We'll test it with a synthetic mind first, an avatar consciousness that can tolerate the memory's weight. If that passes, we'll test with a living mind again, slowly, with consent and oversight." A plan formed in their minds, not a promises, but a series of steps, tests, calibrations, safeguards, ethical constraints, a clear chain of custody for memory. They would not simply carry back a fragment of the vault's life. They would carry back a rewritten model of how memory and humanity could coexist. If they could do that, perhaps they could help Earth learn to live with its own memories, its own trauma, and its own wisdom. Night began to fall on the planet with its violet sky and the slow, patient echo of distant thunder. The ruins around them seemed to lean closer, listening to the trio, as if the stones themselves remembered the moment of their coming and hoped to hear the new voices that would leave a mark upon them. The vault's entrance glowed faintly as a living thing, the memory's last gift to them. A sign that the door would stay open so long as they kept faith with the memory's code of conduct. They began the ascent back to the shuttle with heavy packs of equipment and lighter hearts than they had entered with. The memory's corridor receded into the distance behind them, like a dream that has reluctantly released you back into waking life. The world, this planet with its dying stars, its long-buried cities, its memory of a people who ended their own wars with acts of compassion, felt at once closer and more distant than ever. On the way back to the shuttle, Merrick paused near a fallen arch that lay as though the planet itself had toppled over to rest on a shoulder. She touched the arch with her gloved hand, the stone cool and rough beneath the glove's fabric, the dust clinging to the fabric like a memory clinging to a person's heart when they walk away from something they cannot fully explain. "We are not the first to walk this road," she said softly, addressing both the living and the dead in the space around her. "We are not the last, either. If we can do right by what we have learned here, we may become a line a reader can trust to bridge time, to hold what should be held and release what should be released." Aaron's steps slowed as he realized what those words signified. He turned to Merrick, his eyes, though tired, bright with something close to a revelation. "The vault's memory was not just asking for a listener," he said. "It was asking for a conversation to begin between beings who might never meet again, but who can choose to carry forward the memory's gift. It wants the future to listen, not just the past to be remembered." Nix's laugh was a short, surprised bark, a sound that carried more relief than humor. "Then we owe it to this memory to listen as carefully as we can, to do our best to speak in a language that respects what it has given us." The ship's engines hummed as though to answer them, a low, continuous note that traveled through the hull, and into their bones they strapped into their seats. The shuttle lifting from the planet's dust with the heavy, measured grace of a creature that knows its own weight and chooses to move with care, even when the world is watching. As they rose, Merrick allowed her eyes to wander to the star field beyond the shuttle's windscreen. The starlight spilled across the glass, a quiet rain of cold light that made her feel tiny, in the best possible way. Tiny enough to admit that she did not know everything, and yet large enough to believe that a path could be found by those who ask the right questions with unyielding honesty. Osiris spoke again, this time with something almost like awe in its synthetic voice. "Captain, the memory's gift is not only a bridge, it is a discipline. The ritual of exchange, the consent, the care for the other's well-being, the insistence on ethics, these are the components of a new kind of exploration that can turn space exploration from conquest into communion." Merrick watched the violet haze of the planet recede into the distance and the starfield expand into a cathedral of possibility. The word communion, a word she had once used only in the most formal of contexts, began to take on a shape in her mind. It was not about surrendering or losing one's autonomy. It was about choosing to join in a shared life, a shared memory, to build something that could outlive the individuals who carried it. The journey back to their ship was quiet, but not empty. Each member of the crew carried with them a small fragment of the vault's memory, a fragment that would not overwhelm them, but would become a seed that could grow into new capacities. Aaron's sense of humility and responsibility toward knowledge, Nix's practical, grounded approach to handling power, Merrick's steadfast belief that leadership meant stewardship over the fragile things that human beings and other beings create together. Osiris's careful, ethical framework that reminded them to place protection and consent at the center of any action involving memory. In the hours that followed, they began the work of translating the experience into a plan. It would create a controlled interface, a guided pathway, to allow living minds to access memory in a way that ensured the experience remained beneficial rather than destabilizing. The first trial would be with a synthetic mind, an avatar consciousness built to mimic human cognitive load and resilience, so that the team could calibrate the process and refine the safety protocols without risking anyone's mind. The Vault's memory had given them more than data. It had offered them a philosophy, a way of treating memory as something earned through empathy and discipline, rather than something to be exploited. It had shown them a window into a civilization that had chosen to shape its technology around the human and the humane, rather than around domination. It was a beacon, a warning, and a promise, the sort of gift that could catalyze a new era of exploration if they could survive the tests that would come. That night, as the ship's lights dimmed to a calm blue and the final modules settled into a steady rhythm, Merrick stood on the balcony, overlooking the planet's sleeping horizon. The memory's whisper still hovered behind her eyelids, a soft music that could be heard if she listened with enough care. She did not fear what the memory could reveal, not now. She trusted the process, the discipline she had spent a lifetime building, and the careful honesty of her crew. "Osiris," she said softly, turning her gaze to the AI's near-invisible presence in the control room. "Log the day as a success, but with a warning. Memory is a delicate instrument. Treat it with care. Do not allow it to become a weapon, even when the world seems to demand it." "I will, and Captain, if I may offer a further suggestion," Osiris replied in its quiet, supportive voice. "The memory's governance requires a continuous feedback loop, a living system that can adapt to the memory's needs while also preserving the crew's safety. I propose an ongoing experimental protocol, a rotating team of volunteers who will undergo the bridge's tests in a controlled cycle, with absolute consent and a visible, auditable record of the experiences, and a public update sent to Earth that explains what is being learned and how it is being stored." Merrick considered for a moment, then nodded, a gesture of quiet agreement. "Do it, but keep the humans in the loop. Every step of the way. And if a test ever becomes too heavy, we stop. We do not force the past to dwell with us longer than it is willing. the ship's engines once again centered themselves into a heartbeat of departure, a rhythm that signaled a voyage not just through space, but through time. They would continue onward to new worlds, to unknown memories and unknown responsibilities, but with a new compass in their hands. Memory, once a force that could fracture a crew or break a civilization. Now a partner in their journey, an ancient ally with a memory of peace that could guide them toward a safer future if they chose to listen long enough and treat what they learned with the care it deserved. In the quiet before sleep, Merrick watched the stars drift by, a road lit by 1,000 distant suns. The vault's gift lay behind them, an unspoken promise that the universe could be approached with wonder, not conquest, and with respect for the living memory of those who had once walked these worlds before them. She did not know what lay ahead, but she did know one thing with certainty. They would choose to walk it together, carefully and bravely, listening for the quiet music of memory that would remind them why they had come out into this endless sea of stars in the first place. And somewhere in the labyrinth of prisms, in the chamber that had once swallowed a fraction of the present to cradle the past, the memory stirred once more, not as a flare of accusation or as a scream of pain, but as a patient, hopeful breath. It did not demand, it offered. It spoke of futures where human beings and memories could stand side by side without fear, where knowledge was a bridge and not a blade. If they kept faith with that memory, it seemed to promise the universe might become a place where exploration was a conversation, not a conquest. The vault's heart continued to beat in the quiet glow of the prisms, and somewhere in the dark between the stars, a door waited to open again for those who approached with reverence and wonder. The voyage would go on, the memory would endure, and the people who carried memory would learn to carry it well, or perhaps learn to let it carry them toward a future they had never imagined, but were now ready to become part of. The night wore on, and the ship slept in its silent orbit, its hull resting as if listening for the soft steps of tomorrow's dawn. The memory slept as well, tucked inside its crystalline chamber, waiting for a voice to call it into language once more. When morning came, it would be time to begin the next phase of their work. A new test, another conversation with memory, and perhaps, if luck and discipline held, a new way to be human in a universe that had long outgrown its childhood of fear. The starry sea stretched vast and merciful, and the ship moved forward through it with the quiet courage of a crew who had learned to listen to the past to better protect the future.